Welcome to LinkedIn Live with personal brand authority, Lida Citroen. Lida is an award-winning executive coach, speaker, and author working with clients in over 30 countries. She helps professionals, entrepreneurs, and business leaders manage the way they're perceived by the people who matter most. From leadership development, executive presence, to strategic communications and social media positioning, Lida's work is thoughtful, motivating, and practical. Get ready for a great program. Here's Lida.
Well, hello. Are you as excited for today's program as I am? Boy, we had 1,200 plus people sign up for this session today. So if you're one of them and you registered in advance, welcome. If you're just joining us spur of the moment, you are in for such a treat. As if you've been in my programs before, you know, one of the things I love to do is find out where you're dialing in from, because we do have quite an international following here on LinkedIn. So if you would do me a favor and just put in the chat where you're dialing in from. It can be the city, the country, the continent. We would love to hear from you because this is a global community here on LinkedIn. And so I'm really excited to hear from you as much as I know you're really excited for today's content. So as you keep those cities and states and countries coming in the chat, I'll go ahead and kick us off. Ooh, we have somebody from Kenya and Portugal. I'll be in Spain in a little bit. California, my hometown. Germany. Oh my gosh, this is my favorite part. Look at all these places. Houston, Maldives. I will trade with you. India, Nigeria, Morocco, Switzerland. Nice. Oh my gosh, keep them coming because we'll see them throughout the program. And just pat yourself on the back for being so tuned in to a topic that is really important. You know, when I was thinking about what we were going to share today, I thought about my role as a public speaker because I have the opportunity to share messages with global audiences, to stand on stage and watch people learn something new or think about something differently than they might have before. And it is truly a monumental experience from my vantage point. And as much as I think I'm teaching, I learn sometimes more valuable lessons from my audience. And I remember many years ago, kind of when I was just starting out in public speaking, I had an opportunity to address a group of school bus drivers. So if you're not from the States, I don't know if you have this where you are, but we have buses that actually pick up children from their homes and their neighborhoods and take them to the school. And I had done work with this school district before, but for the first time, I was on stage teaching personal branding to school bus drivers, the people who actually man the buses. This was a totally different audience for me. But I approached it very similar to how I would approach any program. I had my PowerPoint, I walked through my methodology, and I noticed about a third of the way in that I'd lost them. I saw people doing this, sitting back in their chairs, well, almost with a scowl on their face. Some of them looked to the person next to them and started shaking their head. They got on their devices. They got on their phones or their computers. And I realized I had lost my audience. And it was a terrifying feeling because I still had 2/3 of the program to deliver. But in that moment, I decided to pivot. And I took a deep breath. And I thought, okay, this isn't going the way it was supposed to. I'm teaching them something that's so valuable, but they're not taking it in. And so I pivoted to telling them what it feels like as a parent to put my children on a school bus. And I told them about my experience as a single mother when my children were little and the terrifying experience of putting them on a bus with somebody I didn't know to take them hopefully to school and keep them safe, to keep them protected. These children that are the most important thing in my world, I was trusting to someone else. And when those children were returned to me later that day, it was the most joyous feeling. And that went on day after day after day after day. And I shared with them my experience in their role. And what I did is I personalized the message for them. And slowly, as I talked, I saw them start to sit up in their seat. And they started nodding their heads instead of shaking. And I then reminded them that if they don't take ownership of their reputation, if they don't stand confident in their role in the ecosystem of an education, then they're giving their power away. In telling that story, I built a relationship with my audience. I helped them understand that this message was not just about teaching a methodology. It was about an experience that meant a lot to me. And that is the power of storytelling. When you can personalize the message, when you can pivot if you need to, if something isn't going well, or when you can show your audience why the message is valuable to them, you've understood the power of storytelling. And many of you know, if you've been following me, that I am working on another book. And the new book is called, I have to read it because I'm not yet versed with it. It's called The New Rules of Influence: How to Authentically Build Trust, Drive Change, and Make an Impact. And it's not a business book. It's a book for people who really want to make a difference, who want to stand up, stand out, drive a cause, create social change, or even just have the confidence to raise their hand in a business meeting. Influence requires you to be able to tell stories. One of the rules is to be a storyteller. So that's a little secret for you. But that's why I'm so excited to have this conversation and bring up our guest today, because Param and I have known each other for a very long time. He is a storytelling and sales conversation coach based out of New Jersey, here in the United States. And after spending 20 years in the tech sector, right, working in technology companies in sales leadership roles, in 2012, he started his own company, Spirea Inc., which is a sales and leadership talent firm that focuses on helping people build 3 critical skills: the ability to connect, the ability to communicate, and the need to collaborate. Over the past 11 years, he has trained and coached and consulted with hundreds of leaders all over the world in the art of storytelling, value selling, and collaboration. So without any further ado, welcome Param to this LinkedIn Live.
Thanks, Lida. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm so excited because I know one thing about you is you are a master storyteller, and half of our conversations start off on one topic, but then we end up someplace else because of all the stories that come forward.
Yep.
How did you get into storytelling?
Well, I had a moment like the story you just talked about from the school bus. 18 months after I started my coaching and training business, I thought it's a good time to go and get some feedback. So I sent out a feedback survey to my clients. I also did the old school of picking up the phone and calling few clients. And I asked this question: what do you remember from whatever I taught you from my programs? Very few people remembered the processes, the methodologies, the tools, the templates. But to my surprise, Lida, everyone remembered the stories I told them, the business stories, the personal stories. And that was the moment I decided that storytelling has to be part of the work I do. And I also reflected back on the 20 years of my career. I was fortunate to be in those executive rooms where you do the high stake presentations. And I saw people drowning in data with Excel sheets. And at the end, the meetings ended with no actions taken, no decisions made. They were not able to influence. So one of the things I want to sort of share today is that stories are the solution. They have the ability. It's a great tool to influence, inspire, engage, and make a great impact. So I'm very excited to talk more about it today with you.
Well, and I think what I heard you say is it's not that the methodology and the process and the teaching aren't valuable, but the stories are sort of the exclamation point. They're what make that message stick.
Yeah.
I know that I've heard you say that storytelling is both art and science. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, it's both art and science. Let me touch on the science part of it first.
Okay.
Three key things. One, stories are memorable. A lot of research has been done on it. In fact, Dr. Jennifer Aker at the Stanford University, she did an experiment where she asked 10 of her students to prepare a 1 minute pitch. They came back and presented. Nine of them had data and facts. One had a human story. And when she went back and asked the audience, people were able to remember that one presentation which had story, but they could hardly remember the nine presentations which had data and facts. So she concluded that stories are about 22 times more memorable than data and facts. That's one. Second is stories are multisensory. So over the weekend on a Saturday, this Saturday I was in New York City. I was walking around Times Square, went into the Starbucks, picked up a coffee, started to walk with a coffee in one hand and some documents on the other. And Times Square is buzzing with activity as always. And all of a sudden, I felt a tap on my shoulder. And I stopped and I turned back. It was a complete stranger. He had seen me dropping some of the papers and he was kind enough to sort of call me out and hand over the papers. I thanked him and I kept walking. Now, this is what is happening as I'm telling you this. My brain is trying to remember, recollect, and retell all the events that happened. You and the audience here, even though you were not with me in New York when this happened, your brain is sort of able to visualize and imagine me going into the Starbucks or walking with a coffee or someone tapping on the shoulder. It's almost like our brains have started to dance together. And that's called coupling of the minds. It's also called neurocoupling in the world of neuroscience. That's why when you tell a story, the listener, almost all the senses of the listeners get activated. That's the power that stories have. The third one is the most important one. And that is, this is important for this audience because a lot of the audience here is presenting and influencing their audience. Stories create a pull. So back in 2017, we decided to get a puppy after a lot of pressure from our daughter, Julie, who is 6 years old now, and it's a different issue. She still jumps around like a puppy. She came in early September. First 2 to 3 weeks were great. We were playing with her, and we were new to dogs. We were also learning with her. So every time we will give her a treat, she will listen to our commands. This was going on for 3 weeks. Then something happened. End of the 3 weeks, Julie fell sick. She was throwing up. And we decided to take her to the vet. The vet examined her and he said, it's okay, it's a stomach bug. You give her this pill twice a day for 5 days and she'll be fine. I said, okay. It looked like exactly like the treat we were giving her. So we came back home and I offered the treat to Julie. They are smart. She sniffed it and she figured out it's not a treat and she just walked away. So when we need a solution, our go-to place is YouTube. So I and my daughter went to YouTube and we saw the video of this guy opening his dog's mouth and trying to push the pill in. I said, let's do that. So my daughter, Sanjana, she opened Julie's mouth and I tried to push the pill in. I want to have the audience feel free to put on chat. What do you think Julie did? And Lida, I'm going to throw it back at you. What do you think Julie did? Did she eat?
I have dogs. I've always had dogs. I can only imagine what your hands looked like as you were trying to shove a pill down a puppy's mouth with those little sharp teeth. Yeah.
She just spit it out. And the point of the story is that's what your audience will do if you try to push your information about your company, about your capabilities, your products and services. Whenever you try to push something, you're going to get a pushback.
Right.
And that's what Julie did. Obviously, we had to give the pill to her. We figured out a solution. Again, please put on chat if you have pets, how to give pill to a puppy. What do you think I did, Lida, finally?
Did you wrap it in something or put it like peanut butter on it?
Exactly. We took a piece of cheese. We wrapped the pill in that piece of cheese and gave it to Julie. She not only had it, she said, give me more. And that's what you need to do. You need to wrap your data, facts, information. Those are important capabilities about your services and your company. But wrap it in a piece of cheese. Here, the cheese is the story. So story is that piece of cheese in which you need to wrap your information and give it to your clients. They will not only take it, they'll say, give me more. That is why stories create a pull. they are memorable, and they are multisensory. That's why stories stick with your audience.
Well, and when you have a chance later to look at the chat, you'll see how many people are like, keep the teeth together, or we've all been there. And so I think you're absolutely right. One of the things I've noticed with people who tell stories, and maybe I do this without realizing, is in our mind, we were there, we know everything that happened, and we might skip details or forget key pieces when we tell the story. And the other person isn't making that connection or the coupling as you talk about. What are some ways that we can work around that?
Yeah, one of the things is, see, you don't need to necessarily have all the details because stories trigger emotions,
Mhm.
right? And so also storytelling is not a one-way street. Okay. It's almost like you need to meet the audience somewhere in the middle.
Mm.
So once you tell your story, it's like I talk about me. I need to say, enough about me, Lida. What about you? Tell me about how did you grow up, and tell me about your childhood in LA. Because story has to lead into a two-way conversation.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just one way, and it can be boring. So I would say that this is what works very well with respect to stories landing properly with your audience.
Well, and one thing you did in the two stories that you told us just now is you cited research, and it was interesting, right? I was making a note of that study. I want to look it up. But you also, then you made it a personal story. So for some people, telling a personal story may feel like too much. They may be uncomfortable or self-conscious about sharing their own experience. What are some ways that people can learn to become more comfortable telling a personal story?
That's a good point. So I will answer it in three parts. One, there is a myth that you cannot use personal stories in business setting, and I want to bust that myth right away and reassure the audience that please go ahead and use personal stories in business setting, because if you see leaders around you or celebrities, they all use personal stories.
Mhm.
But the second, which is a follow-up to this, is that you can use personal stories, and there's nothing called too personal as long as it makes a business point. So the story has to be in the context of your conversation. Otherwise, it won't make sense for your audience. I'll give an example. This is a storytelling, so I need to share some stories. This is something I heard from one of our partner storytellers in Hong Kong, Francis Mock. He used to work for the subway system, the mass rapid transit
Mhm.
system, and they were going through losses. So the board of directors appointed a new CEO and told the CEO to cut costs, let go people. And he had to go to the first town hall and convey this message. He said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to figure out some other solution. So he went and told this personal story. He said that 25 years back when I got married, I and my wife were spending a lot of money. We were going to movies every day. We went to restaurants very frequently. We were buying things, and our bank accounts looked still good. Then we had our first baby. Our expenses went up. Then after 2 years, we had our second child, and the expenses skyrocketed. So one day I came back home. This is him narrating, and sort of told my wife, listen, we need to figure out a way to manage our expenses. We need to cut our expenses. And his wife responded to him saying, no, we are not cutting expenses. You're going to figure out how to make more money. And then he went on to tell his employees, that's what I want to do. I want to work with you to figure out how can we make more money, more revenues, because I don't want to cut cost. So if you look at it, he revealed a lot of personal things. It was quite personal about his conversation with the wife, but he was trying to make a business point, and
Mm.
they actually went on to start a consulting division and increase revenues. There's only one third thing I want the audience to be think about. Stories travel. A story told here could reach Kenya or wherever, right?
Mhm.
So do a little test. When you are telling a story, keep in mind that it may go beyond the person you are telling. So just ensure that will that story impact the reputation and brand leader that you talk about. If it passes that test, I think it's nothing called very personal about stories.
I love how you framed that. And I think, no matter how extroverted we might think we are or how comfortable we are speaking, when it comes to sharing about us, it does sometimes make us feel vulnerable. I mean, I remember the moment when I took note of the fact that I didn't share personal stories when I was teaching, but the questions I would get asked by the audience were all about me. How did I relate to the message? How did I build my brand? What were some of the challenges I encountered when I started my company? And it seemed so odd. Like, why would they care about me? They care about what I'm teaching, right? Because this is valuable information. But to your point, they needed both. They needed me to wrap that pill in cheese
Exactly. Yeah.
because that was what was going to make it stick. And for those of you who might feel uncomfortable or be a little apprehensive about talking about your life, or, I do a lot of work with the military. There's a very fine line between how much they can share and how much they're comfortable sharing. Just it's sometimes baby steps, don't you
Yeah.
think? Like, try a couple stories which aren't deeply personal about trauma or anything like that, but
Exactly.
just, to your point, wrap a business message in something that explains how you relate to it. Would you agree with that?
I totally agree. And also,
Okay.
if you're not very comfortable, as Lida said, try some stories first and get to sort of practice it. And you don't have to always share your own story. I could take permission from Lida about her school bus teaching the children story. As long as I give credit to Lida, here is what I heard from my colleague Lida. It's okay to use somebody else's story, right? That's one. And
Mhm.
two, you can also use an example. You could use something visual. For example, I remember 2011, when I was in corporate, we had lost a big contract, and it was a big retail clothing company. We decided to go and meet the chief information officer to ask why we lost it. And he made this statement. He said, "You did not come across as one smooth piece of cloth. We could see the stitches." Now, that's just a visual to communicate that you did not come across as one team. So you could use those kind of visuals, metaphors. You could say, we all need to row the boat in one direction. That's how we are going to win. So
Mm.
stories are the best, but if you are not comfortable, use other stories, use metaphors, use examples, use visuals.
And what you're doing is you're painting the picture,
Painting the
right?
picture.
Like in your story, you're helping that person who's hearing you visualize somebody tapping you on the shoulder, which, hats off to you. Because if somebody taps me on the shoulder in New York City, I'm not sure that I would be as
Yeah.
open, especially Times Square. But, to your point, we could feel that experience happening. Um, Donald Miller wrote a very famous book called Story Brand. And many of us have read it. Some of us have read it many times. And when he talks about how businesses have to tell a story, right? Why the product or service or company has a personality and how it relates to its customers. But one of the things he talked about in the book is that the hero of the story is not you and me. It's not the person telling the story. How would you expand on that in the context of the kind of storytelling that you're talking about for us as individuals?
No, that's a very important point he has made, that never make yourself the hero of the story, especially for our audience here. If you're in sales or recruiting or any function where you are sharing a success story to a new client, this is how you got to go about and say. A lot of the people do the mistake of narrating their success story by saying, our client was in a mess, we came in, we had a solution, we got the client out of the mess, and now they are doing great. Now, if I am your new client to whom you're pitching, I understand maybe that was the reality, but seems like you were very successful. What about your client? I didn't at all hear about the success of your client. So the way to look at it is, if you are followers of Star Wars, you are not Luke Skywalker. You are not the hero. You are the Yoda. You are the guide. So always narrate the success story in a way that you came as a guide to help your client, and talk about your client's success. Be the Yoda. That's the way I would sort of narrate any stories.
Be the Yoda. There's your tagline for Param. Be the Yoda.
Yeah.
Well, and what you're really saying though is, yeah, and we tend to do this, especially when we think we're selling or we're promoting, and we do that on social media. I see a lot of people on their LinkedIn page, for instance. And I know we had some questions about how does storytelling play out on social media. They say, I'm great, I do this, this is how, I'm a success. But the person looking at your profile wants to know, how are you going to help them solve their problems? How are you going to make the world better for them? So use the word that you use, you show that you're guiding them, right? It's my methodology, my training, and my tools that help make this client successful. And this is what they did. This is their situation. This is what they did. And this is the result. You could use the STAR method, but always be thinking that the person listening or reading is trying to understand how you can help them, not how great you are, but how you can help them.
Exactly. And also, even when you're introducing yourself or you're in a town hall, you don't need to start off saying, I'm so and so, I'm the CEO, I do this. Just share a story. Let people reveal who you are and what your character is and what you have done from that story. So you don't have to always introduce and talk about yourself. So don't make yourself the hero. Let them find out that you are the hero.
Or that you're the guide, right? Because
You're
they're
the
the
guy.
hero.
You're
Right.
the hero.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Another thing you and I talk about a lot, and we both work in different cultures, right? Internationally, different audiences. How do stories play when you're dealing with different cultures? You mentioned that stories travel, but how can you ensure that your message is going to get translated culturally as well as in the language?
Yeah. So here is my take on it. Having done these programs globally, personal stories, in my experience, the barrier is not that great. You can share personal stories because people are humans. If I'm going to share a story about my pet or family, there isn't much of a cultural barrier because people have families, people have pets. But the moment you start sharing a business story or something very specific to your country, your region, for example, I did a little mess up a few years back. I was doing a program for Asia. We had all the participants from Asia, and I played a video clip of Modern Family. And a day before, I had played the same clip for the participants in the US. They were laughing, they got the point, and it really made a big impact. When I played this, they were just staring and they didn't understand why am I playing this video and what's going on. So you have to be careful with respect to, obviously, culturally, what stories are you sharing. Even regionally, leader, if you go to, let's say, the coal mines in West Virginia and you start telling some Wall Street story, it's not going to sit well with them. So cultural is one aspect, regional, and who's your audience? It's like anything else. Know your audience before you share your story. That's still the basics of communication.
So can this work if, let's say, you're in a position where you have to speak to senior leadership in your company and you have to advocate for, let's say, increasing your budget? So a lot of numbers, a lot of data. And how do you wrap stories around that? Or if your boss is very data driven, right? They're very analytical. How would you approach something like that? What would your process look like?
Yeah, and we get into that a lot, and we have worked with a lot of people. I have done storytelling programs where we had CFOs, head of taxation, people who are like in numbers day in and day out. End of the day, they are humans, and data is important, but research shows that data leads to conclusion. It is the emotions that lead to action and decision. So even though your leaders might be loving data, it will only lead them to a conclusion, but that won't inspire them to take a decision. And I'll share one more sort of an anecdote. Another partner storyteller from Australia, Cam, his niece came home and she's an HR manager. And she was telling him that a lot of people are leaving our company. There is a huge attrition. And week after week in my meetings, I keep presenting this data to my CEO and CFO, but they don't care at all. They only care about revenues. I don't know what to do. So he suggested try the story method. So she went back into the next meeting. First, she presented the data and facts. Nothing happened. Then she took a bold step. She painted a future story. So that sometimes works better with people who love data. She said, we are 6 people here in this room. Imagine in 3 months, only 3 of us are here in this room. Other 3 have left. Imagine what will happen. And the CEO looked at her and said, "What do you mean only three will be left? Why would you all leave?" That's the question I've been trying to tell you, that why are the people leaving? He got it. So it's about packing the data and putting a picture of the future of how things could look like
Right.
if we don't do certain things. And believe me, Lida, we had a head of taxation, but trying this out and coming back and telling us that. I think I nailed it with the story.
Well, if I can win over a group of school bus drivers, I know you can work with the head of taxation.
Yeah.
And you know what I forgot to mention? That group of school bus drivers was my very first standing ovation.
Nice.
It was so cool. So yes, I have a heart for everyone. And the way that I actually phrase what you said, data drives connection or conclusion. The marketing axiom that I often use is we act on logic, right? I need a new car, but we buy on feelings and emotion.
Absolutely.
That one makes me feel sexy or attractive or successful. So we can't forget that logic and data get us to the conversation, right? That's the reason we're gathered here today, is to talk about the budget. But the emotion, being able to really connect with people, is where we get buying decisions, right? That's if somebody doesn't feel something, if you haven't moved them, then you're staying just on the logic side.
I had a friend of mine who's always very technical. When he's buying a car, he had a list of things that he needs in his car. And then he goes into the showroom, sees a beautiful red car, and he came out with the car, and it did not have the features that he wanted, not all features that he wanted. So it was an emotional decision, and we all do that in our lives.
Of course we do. And I always say, if you don't think, you've made an emotional buying decision, look at the last thing you paid more for.
Yeah.
There was a generic option, whether it's a purse, a computer, whatever there was a generic option, but you paid for the branded option. That's what brands do, is they make a connection. So Param, can anyone do this? Can anyone learn to become a storyteller?
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think this is where the art part comes.
Okay.
Anyone can become a storyteller, but it's like any other art. You can't go to 2 violin lessons and become a violinist. So you can't, attend one session or a couple of programs. You have to practice. And, that's what I and many of our partners, we teach how to do storytelling, give you a structure. Also, you need not be in sales. You could be in any role in your company, recruiting, you could be in HR, you could be in strategy, and you could learn storytelling, especially for people in strategy and communication. I've seen that people are very good in crafting an idea and crafting a strategy, sitting in the headquarters, but by the time it comes down, that message is lost. Right? That message is completely lost. It's like our old childhood telephone game that we used to play, that Sally says something to Jack, Jack to Tom, Tom to Julie. Now the Julie has to repeat what Sally said, and the message is gone. I call it the headquarters syndrome. Yeah, it's there. Something called headquarters syndrome exists, where people in headquarters create this strategy and idea, but they're not good at communicating it because it's very abstract. They're not packing those stories and giving those examples. So anyone can learn. You could be in any function, but it's an art like anything else, and you need to work on it. You need to practice it.
Well, and somebody asked a question about time constraints, and that reminds me, when I did my TED Talk, we were told we had 12 minutes. And in 12 minutes, I had to, as they say, unpack one idea. Now, 12 minutes is a long time if you're presenting your budget idea or advocating for a raise or something, or selling to a customer. 12 minutes can be a lot. But when you have to take an audience and bring them completely through a message in 12 minutes, you find how many things you can actually leave out. So there's a lot of stuff written about how to do TED Talks, and it is a great practice in storytelling, because we have to be concise. To your point, what's the business message and how does the story wrap around that? Not just the story and how do I shove a message in there, right?
Exactly. And from a timing perspective, you could have a 2-minute story, you could have a slightly longer story, as long as you are hooking your audience and you feel that they are reacting to you. Otherwise, if you keep telling a story and don't make a business point, obviously, that's not a good way to go about. So ensure that you're making a business point. And stories could be as short as 30 seconds and as long as 3 to 4 minutes.
Question for you. As you're talking, I'm remembering a situation where I was in a group of men and women, and a woman was sharing a business reason, but she wrapped a story around it, and the story was really personal. She was talking about difficulty during childbirth, and the women in the room who had children could certainly click with it. The men in the room became uncomfortable. I'm sure there was a point to her story, and I'm sure she connected it to the business, but she lost and made the men uncomfortable in that room. What do you do if you're halfway through a story and you realize wrong story?
Yeah, that can happen. And that's why obviously you need to know your audience and pick the right stories. And I say you
Right.
need to have a bank of stories and pick out the right stories like a magician and bring it out. If you're halfway through the stories, I think one is be natural. I think being authentic always helps. There's no sort of going back, but make that business point. And as long as you're able to make a business point and maybe involve them, you could trigger them to tell a story. I know I shared this. I know it's personal. I know maybe some of you got it and connected to it. I would like to know from any of you, men or women, did something like this happen to you? Trigger them to share back a story, and good chance now you are in a story conversation. It's not like a one-way street.
Got it. Because I think we've all been there where somebody shares too much information,
Yeah.
and it becomes very uncomfortable. So to your point, we really do need to know who we're talking to. We need to know how much do they know about this topic, right? When I did my TED Talk, I had to assume somebody didn't know anything about the military or somebody was a prior military service member themselves. So what are some ways that we can learn about our audience so that we make sure that the stories always fit?
Yeah, no, I always used to do this when I was in the corporate world. Some of my team members will come and talk about the meeting that we are going to. I'll always ask the question, who is going to be in the room? What are they like? Anything that you can find about the audience is great. But obviously, if you're going to do a TED talk where you're going to have complete strangers, you may
Right.
not have the complete sense of the audience. But if it is a smaller group, I would strongly recommend you will always have someone who's more closer to you, connected to you. Make them your champion. Ensure that you do a little test with them. Ask them more about who's going to be there, what will sit with this audience, and do a little analysis. And today in LinkedIn also, we are able to do a lot of I think LinkedIn is a great tool to figure out more about what groups some people are following, or what are their thoughts, what do they believe in. And I think there's a lot of information out here which was not there many years back. So I think that's probably a good way to do a bit of analysis. And then be natural,
Yeah.
connect with them. Stories help to connect and build trust. As the saying goes, stories are the shortest distance between two people. So if you want to reduce the distance between you and someone, share a story.
I love that. Stories are the shortest distance between two people. Love that. And you're right. So I think about somebody going for a job interview who should be looking up the recruiter's LinkedIn profile. Look at where they went to school. What sports were they active in? Where do they volunteer? Like you said, what groups are they following? This is where you're going to find areas of common interest, but you're also going to be thinking about the stories that that person might care about. And then as you study the company that you're interviewing with, you're thinking about culturally what the company cares about. And I heard you allude to this, but the thing we always have to be when we tell stories is authentic, right? We
Yeah.
can't claim someone else's story for our own. We shouldn't make up stories just because it sounds good. What are some ways we can hold ourselves accountable to stay authentic, do you think?
No, that's important. It's part of what I call it the story ethics. You have to be
Yep.
authentic. You cannot make up stories, especially in the business world, because stories travel. So somewhere people will get to know about it. So I'll share an example. There was this president of a chamber of commerce, and he was inaugurating a 3-day event, and he started speaking. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming here. I really appreciate that you have taken time to come away from your families to be with all of us for the 3 day event. And he went on to say, as I was in the airport at Dallas trying to catch a flight, I saw this mother and daughter hugging each other and crying. Seemed like they were going to separate from each other for long. And that's really made me emotional. And I'm sure many of you are away from your families to come here. As he was saying this, half of the audience were nodding and feeling great, but there were some looking at each other because this story was actually viral on Facebook. He made it as if he was there and part of the story. And when you do that, your credibility comes down no time. He could have just said, I don't know if any of you saw this story on Facebook. That's it. That one sentence he could have added and went on to tell a story. So always set the context, give credit to where the story came from. Don't make it your story because then you're going to lose credibility.
Yeah. And like you said, stories travel.
Yeah.
Excellent. Anything we haven't talked about that you want to make sure we get in before we go to questions?
One other thing I would like to say for a previous question you asked is that, especially we have a lot of technology folks, there is this concept of curse of knowledge. When you have a lot of knowledge in your subject matter, you become a subject matter expert. Your expertise becomes too much that you start explaining things in jargons, and your audience cannot understand what you're talking. So that's called curse of knowledge. There was this PhD student at Stanford in 1992, Elizabeth Newton. She did an experiment. She put people in pairs. She asked the first person to tap a song, and the second person has to listen and tell what song it is. So the tapper will tap a simple song like Happy Birthday, and the listener could not tell what song it is. Only 2% of the people could actually recognize the song. The reason is when the person is tapping, there's a tune playing in your head, the Happy Birthday. But that tune is not playing in listener's head. So when you are pitching your technical stuff, that is this tune of your expertise playing, but your listener doesn't understand. For them, it's like they're tapping the song, which they can't understand. So don't get into the curse of knowledge. Understand that there could be audience who don't understand your area of expertise, and get away from the jargons. Mark Twain has said, don't use a $5 word when you can just use a 50-cent word. And that's what my recommendation is. Simple business language helps a lot in stories to stick.
That might also explain why nobody can understand the song I'm singing when I'm trying to ask my husband, what is the name of that song? Because it makes perfect sense in my head. It is not coming through, and I'm not tapping. So much amazing content. I mean, I've seen questions coming in. I know that Sabrina, who's been monitoring the chat, has been watching. I do want to make sure we get those action items mentioned before we move to questions, because we all want to take this information and start working with it. So the first action item that I heard you say is to create a sort of an inventory or a bank. And let's start with 5 stories. Just start with 5 good stories, which you could modify to support different business ideas. Just start with 5, write them down, put them on index cards. That's what I used to do when I was building my speeches, is I would have these stories on index cards. Number 2, introduce stories into your daily work, and just start with 1 to 2. Start with 1 to 2 stories that you start working in. Maybe it's on your LinkedIn profile. Maybe it's in a meeting you have this afternoon or tomorrow. But start small so that you see how this starts to work. Number 3, think of your story in 3 parts. And we didn't really go over this, but a story, any message has 3 parts. It has an opening, a middle, and a close. The opening, as Param said, could be a story. It could be an aha or a shocking statistic or something of surprise. It could be an emotional hook, but we call the opening the hook. And you have to have a good hook, because if you start off dry, it's really hard to build back up. The middle of the story or the message is where you unpack the key points and you build supporting points and all of that. But the end of the story is just as important. I've seen wonderful speakers get to the end of their message and just go, well, that's all I had. So if anybody has any questions, and it's like, yuck. There's an analogy of, somebody on the balance beam in gymnastics. And when they come off the balance beam, they stick the landing, right? You want to stick the landing with a story. It doesn't have to be a ta-da, but make sure that you think through what the ending is going to look like. Is it a call to a request? Do you need somebody to do something? Do you want them to think about something? What is the end of the story going to look like? So think about your stories in 3 parts. Number 4 is start listening for stories. Param told some wonderful stories today. Start paying attention to how those stories are crafted, how they're organized, how they're delivered, how his voice shifted as he was telling something that was anticipatory. Somebody tapped on his shoulder. What was that about? And then the reveal, right? So start thinking about that. And then finally, the 5th one is remember that you're not the hero of your story. The other person has to put themselves in the position to see themselves as the hero. They will be more successful, happier, avoiding fear, avoiding pain, whatever it is. They're the hero of the story, not us.
Yeah.
So we're about to get to questions. Sabrina, I know we have a lot of questions that have been coming up. Sabrina mans the chat and has been putting wonderful things into the chat to support everything we're talking about. Let's see our first question. Okay. Oh, a LinkedIn user says, how to maintain storytelling authenticity. Wow. And the rise of generative AI. And Param, I will let you take this one.
Yeah, no, sure. Obviously, the world is polarized and there's all kind of stories going on. And it's even more challenging to be sure that the stories that you want to share and it does a perfect landing, like Lida said with the gymnast, it almost many times may not land because people have entrenched beliefs, right? And in the world of AI, yes, you can manipulate the stories. It's quite possible. So those are the world that we are getting into at this point of time. But end of the day, even generative AI and people who are data scientists have even big folks like Microsoft CEO. Everybody is saying it is going to enable. It is not going to humanize. If you want to humanize, if you want to be authentic, I think come just share your personal stories and it will make you feel more human and connect better. But obviously, we all need to figure out how this AI can change the way storytelling is going to go about. There's also data storytelling, right? So you can always do a bit of data storytelling where you take the numbers and convert that into data, but nothing like sharing a human story.
Yeah, and it's got to make sense to your point, right? If you start telling a story about childbirth, people are going to look at you like, what? Because you wouldn't have experienced that the same way that the woman I heard telling it. So there's only so much AI can do.
Yeah. And one more thing is that when you tell a story, I don't know, maybe AI will tell you back a story. You want to be telling a story and wanting the other person to share a story. That's when it becomes a story conversation. Otherwise, it's like playing a video game.
Explain that.
So there was this guy selling many years back, selling televisions in a village. And he was going on his bike and he saw a bunch of villagers sitting in the evening talking to each other. And he stopped by and asked, what are you doing? Oh, no, whole day we work in farms. So end of the day, we just come and just share our stories. He said, okay, you don't have to do that. Here's this box, television. It tells stories all day. So you don't have to worry about it. He sold a lot of televisions. And after a month, when he was passing by that village, he saw all the TVs were stacked and the people were again sitting together. And he went and asked, what happened? You're not watching TV? No, that box just tells stories. It doesn't listen to my story. And the fun is when we are together and share stories with each other. And that is why I say that it is a collective conversation. It's not a one-way street.
I love that. Love that. Absolutely fabulous. Sabrina, do we have another question? Talking about culture sensitivity, how do you gauge the culture of your audience when sharing content on social media where there is a myriad of cultures? Fabulous question. Thank you, my friend.
I'll give my bit of it, but I think you are a much better social media expert than me. So now we are in a world where we have folks from all over the world looking at our social media content. So I would say that it's difficult to do research on every culture and every audience. So just ensure that your whatever you put it out there can travel. So do a little test, ask someone before you actually put it out there, and ensure that it is not going to hurt anybody's feelings. So I think bit of audience analysis you can do, but you can't do a lot. So just be careful about what you put out there. Any comments from you, Lida? Because you're much more into social media than me.
Yeah,
I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
Well, I mean, I think there's always cultural sensitivity, right? And one of the things I'm a big proponent of is inclusivity. So, we never want someone to feel like they're not part of the conversation, whether it's on social media or even in a presentation. So I don't start off my presentations and say, hey guys, because somebody who's female might not connect with that.
Yep.
I make sure my stories have different perspectives. My visuals, my slides show people of different abilities and disabilities and cultures and all of that. I think when it comes to social media, there's almost a little bit more tolerance for somebody from America, for instance, being able to speak in American slang or American lingo. I think somebody in West Africa or in Switzerland would know to modify that. Similar to if I see a post from one of my good friends in West Africa, I'm going to know that culturally it makes more sense there. I think where we might get into trouble is humor.
Yeah.
And sometimes humor can actually be, it can be playful in one culture and it can be really hurtful in another. So my advice is always with social media, be really careful about the humor that you share or things that are tongue in cheek or, just sort of off the cuff, because a phrase or an example might be actually hurtful to someone in a culture where they experienced a very different situation based on the scenario you're talking about. So there's a lot of tolerance. I think if you have a diverse network like I do, if there's ever something that gets posted or shared or I comment and somebody in another culture sees it as insensitive, they're going to reach out to me and say, whoa, time out. I don't think you understand how that plays out in this culture. And I would immediately act on that. But if you don't have that, a little bit of research goes a long way. A long way.
I agree with you. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, and somebody else mentions that, think about human beings as human beings, right? We all have feelings.
We're all human. We do mistakes, we learn, we correct ourselves. So, just be authentic and you learn.
Exactly. It's all about learning.
Yeah.
Sabrina, do we have another question? Please explain how to make the listener the hero of the story. Would you like to take that one?
Sure. If you look at the example I gave you of how to share a success story to a new client, in a way, what you're telling your new client or whoever your audience is, you're trying to talk about how you were a Yoda, a guide, and made the other client or other audience successful, and painting a picture how they can be successful, how you can help them to get promoted, maybe. So the client, whoever is listening to you, also wants to feel like if I partner with him or her, will I also get promoted? Will it become a good business case for me, for my company? Will I get noticed? And that is how you can make them the hero of the story. It is always you're trying to make your other client and the new client or the audience the hero of the story. So it's about how you paint a picture so that they start to feel, I should partner with them. If I partner with them, there's a good chance I might become hero in my company. That's the way to go about it.
A way that would play out for me, I do a lot of interviews when people want to consider me for executive coaching or reputation repair. They want to hire me to help them solve a situation or grow their visibility. And if I just focus on the process that I have developed, the tools that I use, the way that I approach my work, the success I've had, then I'm the hero of the story because I'm making myself look fabulous, right? And I am fabulous. But the person listening wants to know that giving me money is going to make them fabulous. So what I would do is I would say, here are some things you will experience as we work together. A recent client of mine at this point in the process, here's what happened for them, which is similar to the situation you're in. So I'm taking them through the experience. I'm still talking about my process and my methodology, but they're putting themselves in the position of somebody going through it. And at the end, they see themselves as successful.
Absolutely.
And that's where they're the hero.
Yeah. Talk about the specific person, not necessarily the company. Then the other person can relate much better and feel like, oh, they could be the hero.
Right. And I think your example of thinking future is another way to do that, right? So in your example where you painted a picture of what the future could look like, the person in the room who said, well, why is everybody leaving? Why have we lost all our... It's like they're in a position now to say, I don't want that to happen. And it's almost as if they put on a cape, and they're flying through the sky. They're saving the day. Exactly. They're the one who sees the vision and they're going to act on your recommendation. They're the hero of the story.
Yep. Agree.
All right. Any other questions, Sabrina? I know that we're about to wrap up and I want to make sure that we get, if there's any other really good, we're getting a lot of positive feedback. This is obviously an awesome topic. Raj says, how to convey story stick when you have 30 minutes with a prospect. Would you focus on a personal story or focus your discussion on the unique selling proposition of your service? Well, you're the sales storyteller, so you'll answer that one.
No, as you said before, focus on bridging that gap between you and your client, right? And stories help to reduce the distance between you and your client. And see, today we are in a world where sales has transitioned from transactional way of selling to even consultative way to insights. Your client already has read a lot about you and your company and your products and the services. I could go to Lida's website and know everything about her. So if you give me 30 minutes and if I use that to talk about the USP of my products and services, you are already lost your opportunity. Yeah. You need to focus on those 30 minutes to connect with your audience, share a little story, ask them, trigger them to talk about what happened. Why are you wanting to do this project? Let them share what their situation is. Right? I think that is where you need to spend time. So if you have 30 minutes, I think stories can be very powerful. The whole idea of the 30 minutes to get the next 30 minutes. Yeah. And not to try to sell everything in the first 30 minutes. So absolutely, I'm happy to, share more about it. We don't have time, but use the 30 minutes to build the connect and the rapport and not sell your products and services.
And I'm going to let one more question come in because Hema asked a fabulous question, which is, can you tell us the story of how you picked your name? Your company.
All right, sure. So back in 2012, when I was starting the company and I was talking to my wife, what should be the name of the company? And that's the year we had done some landscaping in the front of the home. And after 2 to 3 months, I and my wife were walking to see how things have come out. There's this one particular flower called Spirea, it's spelled as Spirea. It bloomed beautifully, pink flowers bloomed. And I said, I want my company to bloom like Spirea. I want to help other companies and individuals to bloom. So we are going to call our company Spirea. We couldn't get the exact letters like the flower, but I ended up calling it Spirea.
I love that. And I'll just share really quick how I came up with my name, because I do a lot of this work with clients, and naming is a big deal for companies. I knew I couldn't use my last name because it is a well-known car company, and we don't own it anymore. So I couldn't use my last name. So I wanted to use my first name somehow, because this was my personal opportunity to go all in. I was not going to, for me, I didn't want to hide behind a company name. I knew I didn't want to have a building and 50 people working with me. So I knew it was all going to be about me. And personally, it was meaningful for me to put my name into it. But there's a plumbing fixture called a Lida 360, or I think it's an acronym. And there's a very large advertising firm in the UK, I think, that's LIDA. So I had to add something, and a branding consultant I was working with said, let's put a short bunch of numbers like 360 at the end. That's literally how hard it was. But then I started getting asked the question, what does your name mean? What does your company name mean? And I didn't have an answer. So I would say to people, what do you think it means? And people said to me, I think it's you're helping people go 360, go all the way around in their life and their career. And I thought, that works. And that became my story, but it wasn't my story. It was a story other people told me. So
beautiful.
What fabulous content. I mean, I know that this recording is going to go up on LinkedIn in a few moments. I encourage everyone on today's program, listen to it again. Param unpacked so many great ideas here, and you can reach him at his website. I know Sabrina has put that in the chat. You can also reach him here on LinkedIn. Let's get his follower count up. And please join me next month. You're not going to believe who I have. Jolie Miller is the head of content for LinkedIn. She and I are going to talk about not only women in leadership, but how do you curate content on LinkedIn? How do you really use LinkedIn to build your leadership brand? So be sure to follow me, follow my newsletter. You'll know when we're going live, and join me next month for Jolie Miller from LinkedIn. Param, as always, you nailed it. This was fabulous. I took tons of notes. And until the next time we see you, be well and be safe.
Thank you, Lida. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.